Thanks for tuning in to the Urban Scope podcast. I have an exclusive for you today. It's a topic I've been thinking about over the last couple of weeks, and more so the last week. I've been kind of honing in, trying to figure out um, about a topic that I'm very passionate about. So, my favorite TV show of all time is The Wire, the HBO based show, The Wire. And it has so much replayability, and I never sat down and thought, why do I actually like this show? So I actually took some time and actually thought about why I love the show so much. And I compiled at least 10 reasons why. There are a plethora more of reasons why, if I wanted to not generalize everything and just kind of like just specify why I really like the show, but I kind of generalized 10 different things from the show that I love. So I'll go through the list of the 10 things that I love, but I want to give kind of preface my comments by saying that I didn't actively watch the show while it was still on TV. When I caught wind of the show was about 2012, so maybe 4 years after the show actually um, hit its last season. The fifth season, I believe, ended in '08. So I caught it 4 years later. So I was able to binge watch it, and I binge watched it. I want to say in like maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks, just strictly going episode by episode, and then I rewatched it again, which I've never rewatched the show in its entirety other than The Wire, and I still watch it today. And I just might pull up a random episode and watch it because I'll be thinking about a specific scene or some specific uh, moment of the show, and I'll just rewatch it. And I'll probably do another segment about which episode is my favorite, well, which season is my favorite, because it's very difficult to do. I would have to actually sit down and do that. A lot of people don't like season two, but season two has a significance to it, and it also has a lot of relevance to the whole story. So I'll get into my top 10 reasons why I love The Wire and why I think it's the best show of all time. So my first reason why I think the show The Wire is the best is because simply for the fact of the quotables. So a lot of shows have quotables, but they don't have quotables that can that relate to your everyday living. So I'll pull apart some of those quotes that I like the most from the show and kind of explain why I love the quote so much. So the first quote is, and forgive my language, it's a direct quote from the show. There you go, giving a fuck when it ain't your turn to give a fuck. So that quote was in context of the show. Usually someone tells McNulty, which is a police officer on the show, or they tell Bunk Moreland, is usually telling McNulty this when he's always stepping in, doing more than what he needs to do, and create more work for people and creating more drama. We know people like this in our everyday life. We know people that go up and above when it's really not necessary, and it actually creates more problems. So that was one of my favorite quotes, and it's pretty much in every season. The second quote is, um, "You have to. It's America." So in context of the show, it's the first episode, season one, episode one. McNulty, the cop, is talking to a kid on the street after there's a homicide. And he's talking to the guy, trying to get him to testify and tell him what he knows. And the guy's like, hey, I don't want to testify. I don't want to be in any courtrooms. So eventually the guy tells McNulty, the guy got killed because of a card game. And he said, well, what happened with the card game? He said, well, this guy, his name was Snot Boogie, I believe. He said he always plays cards with us. Well, plays dice with us. And when he in the dice game, he always picks up the money and runs. We beat him up, and then nobody thinks about it, and we just go on the next day. And he said this particular time he picked up, he was playing dice. He picked up the money, ran, and he ended up getting shot and killed. Trigger warning. Sorry, that was a little late. But he asked him, he said, hey, if he keeps stealing the money every time and you guys know he's going to do it, why do you continue to let him play? And he said, man, you have to. It's America. And that was a very powerful message. And like I said, it's a quotable, which we think about every day. we go through the same stuff every day, and whether it's beneficial or not, we just have to because that's what society says. So that was a powerful quotable. And then the last one is money ain't got no owners, only spenders. So there's a scene where Marlo, he was a drug dealer on the show. He was in a card game, a high level, I believe a poker game. And Omar, who's, he robs drug dealers on the show. He goes in there and he robs the card game. So Marlo tells Omar, "Hey man, that's my money." And he says, "Hey, money ain't got no owners, only spenders." So that was another powerful quote, because, like I said, we all knew celebrities or knew of celebrities who had all this money and they lost it because money doesn't is not owned to anyone. Money can be lost in a drop of a hat. Money isn't, it won't carry you in the afterlife. It didn't carry you before this life. So money comes and goes. Once you spend it, it goes on to the next person. Nobody actually owns money unless you're just sitting on money. But even then, somebody can steal the money, and money is not permanent. Money is not a spade, so to speak. It doesn't stick. So the second reason why I love the show so much is just the different characters and how they come together. So some of my favorite characters on the show was Bubbles, who, um, like I said, he was an addict on the show. Omar, who was the robber of drug dealers. You had Cuddy, who was in prison for a long time, and got out and kind of made some alterations to his life. I'll kind of go into depth of these characters later. Then you have Senator Davis, who was a senator, and I'll kind of go into detail about him as well. Stringer, who was a dealer, and then Prop Joe, who was a dealer as well. So it's just not just the characters that they have, but it's the complexity of the characters and the nuances that they added to the characters, who were somewhat based on a true life characters. A lot of them were, which I'll get into detail about that later as well. So it's just not that they had these characters and they were funny or entertaining, but they were complex and they were somewhat built on real life characters from the creator David Simon, who created the show. And then third is just the different perspectives. So most shows, like I said, I love The Wire, but I love 50 Cent shows from the Power shows, and I love Breaking Bad and Snowfall and all these other different crime shows. But what separates The Wire from all of these shows is the different perspectives that you get, uh, than other shows really don't give you as much. Some of these shows kind of dabble into different perspectives, but they don't go into depth like The Wire does. And you don't get these dialogues and learn the politics of each different job. So not only do you get the street side from the dealers and the robbers and the people who take away from the game on the streets, but you also get, you get the senator, you get the mayor's perspective, you get the defense attorneys, you get the district attorney, you get the prosecutors, you get the FBI, you get the newspaper perspective. They have a whole season 4, that's dedicated to the kids' perspective of the kid dealers and kids in school and how everything affects them. You also get the dock workers and the supply. You get to know who the suppliers are. You get to know their characters a little bit, not the complexity so much, but you at least get to know who they are and how they move. And then the dock workers as well, which most shows don't show you that, how it gets onto the ports and how the product gets moved along the line. So you get all of that stuff, and it's more complex than just we're just going to show you somebody who's a lawyer. You get to see how they think, how they move, how they tell their clients to move. And that's number 3. So number 4, one of the biggest things I like about the show is that it didn't just glorify crime, but it glorified change. For example, Cuddy, he was a convict who was in jail for murder for 15 years. He gets out, tries to dabble in the street life, figure out he's a changed man. He doesn't want to live that life anymore. So he turns and gets a boxing gym, start teaching kids, becomes a positive member of society. Shows reform. Most shows don't show you reform. It's kind of a lot of stagnant characters. The Wire does have stagnant characters, but a lot of change. Bubbles, he was an addict turned informant addict. But towards the end, he like the last couple seasons, he gets clean. he doesn't become an informant anymore, and he becomes a productive member of society who just, he's working a job, living with his sister, and trying to get his life back together, and trying to get his kid back in his life as well. You have Carver, who was the goofy cop who was kind of immature, who turns into a lieutenant at the end of the season finale. How his journey of how he learned and how he was schooled from people like Bunny Colvin and things like that. D'Angelo, who was a nephew of Avon Barksdale, who was the kingpin. He, first of this first season, he gets out of jail from beating a murder charge, and he dabbles in the streets and figure out that the game is more vicious than it needs to be, and he doesn't want to be a part of it. But he ends up taking time for Avon and end up ultimately meeting his uh, fatality in prison after trying to serve a 20-year sentence. You have Perez, who's an officer who turns into a teacher after accidentally killing another cop. And as he was a cop as well, but he didn't have the heart for it. He was more about the smarts and the academics. So he actually goes on to do what he's passionate about, helping kids. Then you have Bunny Colvin, who was an officer who turned to an academic after he legalized drugs in zones. And he became, academic and changed his way of thinking as well. And so the fifth reason is just because the show is based on a true story somewhere. Um, most, like, a couple of the characters or several characters was based on different people. Who David Simon, he was the creator of The Wire. He was also he worked for the newspaper. So he had direct dealings with these people, and he had direct knowledge of these stories, and he wrote some of these stories about these people. So like Avon was based on two characters, Melvin Williams and Nathan Barksdale. Stringer was built on like three people. It was Stringer Reed and Roland Bell, but his story was compared to Kenneth Jackson, who was a drug dealer who attended college classes and was business savvy and owned businesses just like Stringer did. Then you have Bubbles, who's based off a character named Possum, who they didn't list his name because he was an informant, so they couldn't give his name, but he ended up dying of AIDS. But in the show, he ended up not having AIDS, and he ended up going on to be clean and be a productive member of society. So, and then Jay Lansman was actually based off Jay Lansman, who was a cop. He plays, and actually the guy who is based off is actually in the show as Major Dennis Mello, who was working alongside Bunny Colvin in the show. And then Omar was just based off a bunch of drug dealers from the 80s to the early 2000s. It was just a collection of different ones. So, and then the sixth reason is realistic compared to other shows, other than like maybe the 22 murders that Chris Parlow was doing, but maybe that might be realistic as well, even though it's not said it was based on a true story. So, shows like Power became very unrealistic toward the end. It was realistic at the beginning. You just had a club owner who was also a dealer, and he also was a family man and all this stuff. That was very realistic. It could happen. But towards the end, it started getting fake when they involved so many different agencies and how they circumvented it. It just became very unrealistic, and the storylines kind of got stale from it. The Wire it never got stale. Even season 2, when people said it didn't, if you appreciate the art of it all, you understand season 2 was very relevant to the grand scheme of things. So, Breaking Bad, I think it was kind of unrealistic just because of a restaurant businessman who did fundraisers for law enforcement, was able to deal with impunity under their noses. I don't think that's really realistic. I mean, it could happen, but for that length of time, I don't think it would have happened. That's why I think The Wire is so realistic. And on top of that, most of the characters are based on real characters, and some of these stories may be real, or have some similar resemblance of what actually happened. So the realism of The Wire and the relevance of it still has today, 20 plus years later. Well, not 20 years. 15 plus years later, it still has a lot of relevance to it. And then the seventh reason why I love The Wire is because of the messages. Just I'm gonna go through a couple of messages that I got through from just thinking about it. There was an episode when they said, it's season 5, episode 1, when they said the bigger the lie, the more they believe. And I'll kind of give you context of the show. They were interrogating two guys, and they made one guy believe that the other guy flipped. And when they took him out to the hallway, I guess he never seen a printer before, and they, taped his hand to a printer and said it was a lie detector test. And when they pre-scanned the answers, and they asked him, did he, murder the guy? And he goes, and the answer comes out false, like he was lying. And then, they kind of laughed it off and said, the bigger the lie, the more they believe. So it's pretty much saying that in society, uh, we pretty much believe what we're told. The news can tell you one thing, but when you look at it, you're like, wow, that didn't even make sense. Or a lot of things we do in life are just nobody questions it because it's been society for so long. And when you do question it, people question you, your sanity, and things like that. So that was an important message. And then another message that they had was they used to say a lot. People are, these people died in an area code that doesn't exist. David Simon, the creator, worked in the news, so he knew how these stories were portrayed. He knew how these stories were conveyed, or how they wasn't taken seriously. So he knew, first off, if you died in like middle, the inner cities and the ghettos and the slums and the impoverished neighborhoods, your death is not going to be seen as someone who lived in the suburbs, and everybody's questioning what happened. It's kind of pro forma, they would say, if you died in the inner city by violence or things like that nature. But if you died in the suburbs in an affluent neighborhood, they were like, wow, what happened? How can we keep the neighborhood safe? But it's not the same in these impoverished neighborhoods. And then so many, but just the scene where the McNugget scene, it was in season 1, where all the younger kids were talking to D'Angelo, and they were like, man, these nuggets are so good. Whoever made these nuggets is rich. But D'Angelo breaks it down to him and said, hey, he might not necessarily be rich. He might just be a guy that's tossing ideas, that's giving credit to the real guys, which we know in society exists. Just because you come up with an idea doesn't mean that you'll be rich from it. The guy who did the super soaker guns, he just got paid not too long ago after maybe a 30-year fight, or finding out he wasn't getting royalties and actually got paid from his invention. Just because you come up with an invention doesn't mean that you'll get the money from it. We see it all the time. Shark Tank. You come up with this $1 million idea, and you might have to give 30% of your business away. So you might not necessarily get the money that you could have got from being independent, because you don't have the funds to start up. The people with the funds kind of take your money off the top, and they keep taking money until you buy away your independence, or buy your freedom, so to speak. And then the Omar message, when he was on the stand testifying against Bird, one of the dealers, and he said, the lawyer said, hey, you're a parasite. You're feeding off people that are that are killing the streets, and they're kind of like, creating all these crimes. And Omar goes, just like you. Because, in actuality, in the show and in real life, the attorneys, paid attorneys, they get paid from these dealers and, people who commit these crimes. But, it's no different than someone who's robbing the drug dealers. They're both getting paid from them. They both feed off of what they're doing. So he kind of made that correlation, which was a big correlation that made you think otherwise. And then the 8th reason why I like The Wire is just because of the development of characters, and I talked about that earlier. Just give Breaking Bad, for example. Jesse kind of changed to having more of a heart towards the end, and then Walter kind of changed, but for the most part, all of those characters pretty much stayed stagnant. They became the same. They didn't become complex. They didn't really progress like The Wire did. You saw significant changes from people using drugs to not using drugs anymore. People from being in crime to won't be in crime anymore. people who became more vicious, like a Michael, who was a kid on the show, who became the new Omar. You just saw development. You saw character development like you didn't see on most shows. Most shows, like I said, they stay the same, and they might change, but it's not that much. We saw drastic changes on The Wire. And then ninth reason is because of the politics. Not only did you see how they juke stats, whether it be in law enforcement or it be in the school system or it's at the newspaper, but you saw how the system works, how the politics worked in these specific fields. You got an in-depth look. Even if you never worked in these fields before, you know what to expect if you went into them. And it's still relevant today, even though the show ended in '08. It's 2024 today, 16 years later. Those politics still exist in those fields. And also, you get to see how the organization moves, like from the dealers, how they had the codes where they wouldn't talk in the car, they wouldn't talk on phones, where they would talk on phones, but they talk on pay phones and through pagers, things like that. That might be not relevant today because people really don't have pagers, but it kind of shows you what law enforcement looks for in like RICOs and like in these different judicial systems, how they kind of put people in a box and how box them in and set them up. And also shows you like the high level officials can be corrupt as well, and how they move. As you know, Senator Davis was very corrupt on that show, and he never changed, even though he faced the crime. Fraud, and he beat the case by just basically saying I'm helping my neighborhood and saying I was providing for my people. It wasn't just for my own needs. How he showed, how you can circumvent the system from a political legislation lens. And then lastly, the show was just not about entertainment. It was about art. So they had classes, or maybe they still have classes on the Wire TV show all the way in Harvard. People are breaking down these episodes, the shows, the characters, the whole shebang. Most shows are not that complex to get a show, get classes at Harvard, to have these scholars actually breaking it down piece by piece. And if you watch the show, all the pieces matter. Um, like I said, I just learned a lot from the show, and just being able to maneuver and learn the games that people play and learn how the system is and how people feel from different perspective and different lenses, because most of the time these shows just come from a crime perspective and don't show you how other people are affected and the other stakeholders, like the family members and even the newspaper, and how kids are affected and how the general system comes together. Like I said, the premise of the show is all the pieces matter, and all the pieces matter to why The Wire is the best show. Well, thanks for tuning into this segment. I'll be covering other shows, and I'll be covering other sports, music, sports, and things of the sort. So until next time, stay tuned. Thank you for watching this episode.